Do you know that while the West trembles at the rise of a young man named Captain Ibrahim Traoré, most African presidents are quiet, painfully quiet, watching from their air-conditioned presidential palaces while a new Sankara walks barefoot through the blood-stained soil of his ancestors? And do you know why? Because many of them are not free. They wear the clothes of freedom. They deliver speeches about Pan-Africanism. They gather in summits to shake hands and pose for photos. But deep down, behind the podiums and beneath their smiles, many African leaders are puppets, controlled, compromised, and caged by the very powers that robbed Africa in broad daylight. And so when Captain Ibrahim Traoré rose, not as a celebrity politician, but as a servant warrior, they could not cheer for him. They could not endorse him. They could not even whisper his name with respect, because doing so would be seen as rebellion by the very people who fund their governments, write their policies, control their currencies, and own their debts. This is the untold tragedy of modern Africa. 1. The silence that screams. You see, when a true revolutionary rises, he doesn't just challenge the enemy, he exposes the cowardice of so-called friends. Ibrahim Traoré has done just that. His actions speak with a thunder that many African presidents cannot match. Expelling French troops and reclaiming sovereignty over Burkina Faso's military decisions. Repossessing gold mines and placing them under national control. Encouraging self-sufficiency in agriculture, trade, and education. Yet while the African people celebrate him on TikTok, in WhatsApp groups, and in student unions, African leaders remain mute. Not because they disagree with him, but because they are not allowed to agree. Their silence is a political survival mechanism. It is a calculated avoidance of the wrath of foreign donors and Western intelligence networks that closely monitor their allegiances. Second, puppet leadership in golden chains. The tragic reality many Africans are waking up to is this: most of our leaders were selected, not elected. Their thrones are not rooted in the will of the people, but in the approval of foreign embassies, multinational corporations, and financial institutions. Beneath the surface of ballot boxes and democratic slogans lies a puppet system, carefully maintained by neo-colonial powers who never truly let go of Africa. In this modern era, colonialism has evolved. The chains are now invisible, but they are still heavy. Today, they come in the form of foreign aid, military training, debt agreements, and strategic partnerships that are anything but equal. The West does not need to send soldiers anymore. They simply train the guards of African presidents in their academies and advise their economic teams through IMF delegations. Most African leaders owe their political survival not to their people, but to international donors. Western-funded NGOs influence electoral commissions. Ambassadors hold sway over security appointments. Foreign intelligence services quietly determine which candidates are safe. It is a performance of democracy, not the substance. So when Captain Ibrahim Traoré breaks that script, refusing loans, rejecting foreign military presence, reclaiming gold mines and pledging self-sufficiency, he becomes a threat to the entire illusion. These puppet leaders do not celebrate his courage, they fear it. Because Traoré's leadership proves something terrifying to them, that real independence is possible, that you don't need the World Bank to build schools, that you don't need French soldiers to fight your battles, that you don't need to beg the West to feed your people. He is showing the continent what leadership looks like, without strings attached. That makes him dangerous, not because he is destabilizing the region, as some claim, but because he is awakening it. If the people see that Traoré is delivering progress without being a Western puppet, they will begin to question their own governments. They will ask, why are we still poor? Why are our resources still controlled by outsiders? Why do our leaders always ask for permission to lead? That question terrifies the elite. So instead of joining Traoré, they distance themselves. They avoid mentioning his name. They parrot the Western media's propaganda, calling him authoritarian, militaristic, or aligned with Russia. But the truth is simpler and more painful. They are afraid. Afraid of the people waking up. Afraid of being exposed. Afraid of a new Africa rising where puppet strings are cut and leadership is measured not by Western approval but by service to the people. So they wear their suits, wave their flags and repeat their talking points, hoping the winds of revolution do not reach their borders. But it's too late. Traore has lit the fire and the youth are fanning the flames. 3. Enslaved by debt, the biblical truth. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. This ancient truth buried in the pages of Scripture is more alive in Africa today than ever before. It is not just a proverb, it is a prophecy fulfilled in our time. African nations have become debtors not just in economy, but in spirit. The very governments sworn to protect their people now serve the interests of global financial empires. Loans are dressed as development assistance, but they are traps wrapped in fine print. Behind every infrastructure project, every road, every airport, every flashy headline, is a web of debt agreements, contracts, interest rates, and penalties. These are not gifts, they are modern-day shackles. Take a look around the continent. Roads built with foreign loans have toll booths run by private companies based in Europe or Asia. Hospitals funded by donor nations require equipment sourced from abroad, with maintenance contracts signed in London or Beijing. Even fertilizer programs, power grids, and mobile towers are financed through debt obligations that keep our economies gasping for air. This is not development, this is dependency. And in this system, African leaders do not govern, they manage debt portfolios. So when Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso stood up and said, "We will not live on our knees anymore. We will mine our gold. We will own our land. We will feed our people. We will break free from foreign loans." He was not just speaking to Burkina Faso, and he was confronting a continental curse. But how many other African presidents can say the same? How many are in a position to refuse loans from the IMF or World Bank? How many dare to even question the terms? Very few, because the truth is bitter. Most African nations do not control their own budgets. Before their finance ministers address their own people, they submit projections to foreign creditors. External consultants sit in meetings that decide how much can be spent on education or how many hospitals can be built. They control the faucet of our finances, turning it on and off as punishment or reward. That is not partnership, that is servitude. And in such a position, a leader cannot cheer for Ibrahim Traoré, because to celebrate him is to admit their own weakness. It is to confess that they are not truly sovereign. It is to accept that they too are wearing chains, just more expensive ones. So what do? They smile on international stages, they host development forums, they speak of partnerships for growth. But behind closed doors, they live in quiet fear. Fear of default, fear of sanctions, fear of being cut off from the money lifeline that keeps their regimes afloat. But fear does not produce freedom. It produces obedience. That is why they hate what Traoré represents. Not because he is violent, not because he is young, not because he is military, but because he is free. And in a continent enslaved by debt, freedom is the greatest threat of all. 4. The curse of colonial continuity. We changed our flag, but we did not change our masters. The Union Jack came down, the tricolour faded, national anthems replaced God Save the Queen. We celebrated independence with dancing in the streets, parades in our capitals, and speeches soaked in optimism. But as the drums quieted and the confetti settled, something insidious remained: control. It wasn't colonialism with boots and bayonets anymore. It evolved into something cleaner, more subtle, more devastating. It became economic colonialism, intellectual domination, and policy occupation. The French still control the West African CFA franc, a currency that must be guaranteed by the French treasury, with a significant portion of our foreign reserves deposited in Paris. How can you claim independence when your money is printed, regulated, and secured by your former colonizer? British companies like AngloGold Ashanti and others still dominate Ghana's gold trade, decades after the British flag left the castle walls of Elmina. The gold is ours, the soil is ours, the blood of the miners is ours, but the profits are theirs. American oil giants like ExxonMobil and Chevron still dictate Nigerian oil policy, influencing everything from pricing structures to export decisions, while the Niger Delta remains poisoned and impoverished. Chinese corporations, under the guise of development partnerships, now build our roads, railways and ports, but their deals are opaque. They control strategic infrastructure in countries like Kenya, Zambia and Angola, holding the keys to the very arteries that drive our economies. So again, we must ask, what exactly did we decolonize? And if the chains are still wrapped around our currencies, contracts, minerals, ports and policies, then what have we truly gained? Our leaders did not dismantle colonialism, they inherited it. And rather than fight to break it, many became its managers. They signed new agreements written in the same imperial language. They took pictures with presidents and prime ministers of the same empires that once whipped our ancestors. They praised development partners who came not to empower us, but to continue what colonial governors once did: extract, exploit, and control. But then came Ibrahim Traoré, and he tore up the script. He didn't negotiate softly, he didn't ask permission. He expelled the French military from Burkina Faso without delay. He exposed neo-colonial mining contracts, revealing how billions were being siphoned from the nation while the people remained poor. He banned foreign companies who refused fair terms. He declared that the wealth of Burkina Faso would serve Burkinabe first, not Paris, not London, not Washington. But perhaps his most dangerous act, he inspired Africans to believe in themselves again. Suddenly the youth no longer wanted French soldiers, they wanted dignity. They didn't want loans, they wanted liberation. They began to chant his name, not as a man, but as a symbol. That is why the West calls him a threat. But Ibrahim Traoré is not the threat. The real threat is truth, because once a people realize they were never truly free, they begin to demand what was stolen. And that, more than any bullet or coup, shakes the empire to its core. 5. The youth are watching and rising. Across the continent, the youth are waking up. They see through the lies of democracy without development. They understand that being told to vote every 4 years means nothing if your future is still controlled from overseas. They are beginning to realize that freedom is not granted, it is taken. And so, while their presidents shake hands with Macron and Biden, the youth chant "Vive Traoré." They wear his face on their t-shirts. They remix his speeches into music. They hold forums on his vision of African unity. The youth have become his voice because the old leaders refuse to speak. And in doing so, the youth are beginning to write a new story for Africa, one that will not wait for permission. 6. Embracing Traoré means admitting that democracy has failed. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth for African elites to confront. To publicly support Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just to praise a young patriotic leader, it is to expose the fragile illusion that modern African governance is functional. It is to acknowledge that military rule, long demonized and dismissed, has, in this case, produced results that so-called democratic regimes have failed to deliver. And that is a truth far too dangerous to admit. You see, for decades, African presidents have sold democracy like a religion. They've held elections, cut ribbons, printed ballots, and invited foreign observers, not to empower their people, but to validate their regimes. They stood in international conferences and told the world, "We are democratic, we are free." But all the while, the people have remained poor, unprotected, and voiceless. They've weaponized the word democracy as a shield against criticism. But what good is democracy if it only reproduces misery? Now here comes Traoré, a man without a campaign, without a political party, without donor funding or billionaire backers, yet delivering food to villages, restoring security, investing in national ownership, and reclaiming the dignity of his people. He has accomplished in 2 years what many African presidents could not do in 2 decades. And that is terrifying, not just to the West, but to his African counterparts, because his success undermines the myth they've built their legitimacy on. It reveals that what they've called democracy is in fact a theater, a democracy of ballots without bread, of speeches without substance, of leadership without loyalty to the people. If they support Traore, they are admitting that it doesn't take a foreign-backed election to serve your nation. It takes will, it takes sacrifice, it takes courage, and many of them have none of the above. But there's another layer. Backing Traore would mean challenging the Western script, the one that insists democracy is the only acceptable form of government, even when it's manipulated by external forces. By endorsing Traore, these leaders would be defying Washington, Brussels, and Paris, all of whom have invested billions into maintaining the illusion of democratic progress in Africa while keeping true sovereignty out of reach. To them, even the idea of supporting a revolutionary soldier is heresy. It would be seen as endorsing a coup, and a coup, in their narrative, is the greatest sin, regardless of whether it saves the nation or uplifts the people. So instead, they cling to their lifeless democracies, where votes are counted but lives don't count, where parliaments pass laws but cannot pass justice, where opposition parties compete not to transform lives but to inherit a throne designed by colonizers. They will never support Traore, not because they don't see the good he is doing, but because doing so would require a confession that they have failed their people, and that their so-called democracy has become a mask for betrayal. And for men drunk on power, with egos bloated by false praise, truth is too bitter to swallow. So they turn their backs. And history watches in silence. 7. Nana Akufo-Addo's betrayal. Reporting Traore to the United States. During his tenure as president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo went even further than silence. In a deeply revealing move, he chose to align with the interests of the United States over the spirit of Pan-Africanism. During a high-level summit, reports emerged that President Akufo-Addo warned US officials about Ibrahim Traoré and his alleged growing influence among West African youth. He allegedly described Traoré as a destabilizing force in the sub-region and insinuated that Burkina Faso under his leadership was leaning dangerously toward Russia and China. His reported statement was, "We are concerned about the influence this leadership style is having on the youth. Burkina Faso is falling under the wrong hands, and if we do not act quickly, other countries may follow their example. This is a threat to regional stability and democratic progress." These words, spoken not to African leaders in unity, but to a foreign superpower, betray more than politics. They betray fear, fear of change, fear of truth. Rather than stand beside his younger brother in the African family, Akufo-Addo chose to report him, like a servant reporting to a master. This moment revealed everything we needed to know about where many African leaders truly place their loyalties. And it wasn't with their people. 8. Personal reflections. A sad truth. As the narrator of Black Stories Untold, I share this not with joy, but with grief. Because this betrayal isn't new. It happened with Lumumba. It happened with Sankara. It happened with Gaddafi. Africa doesn't bury its enemies, it buries its revolutionaries. And now the same pattern is repeating. But this time, something is different. This time, the people are not sleeping. This time, the betrayal is being recorded, reposted, and remembered. The youth will not forget who stood for freedom and who sold it. And that knowledge alone is power. 9. A message to African leaders. To those still hiding in silence, consider this. Your time is ending. You will not rule forever. And when the day of reckoning comes, the people will ask, where were you when Ibrahim Traoré stood alone? Where were you when Africa had a chance to break the chains for good? And what will you say? That you were afraid, that you were loyal to your donors, that you didn't want to offend Washington? History will not forgive cowardice, nor will the continent your ancestors died to protect. So I ask again, where do you stand? 10. A new dawn is coming. Africa is changing, not through ballots, not through policies, but through hearts, through minds, and through the rising consciousness of her children. Let the stories of the silent be recorded. Let the voices of the bold be amplified. And let every African youth know you are not alone. Your voice is part of a new chorus, one that sings of liberation, truth, and justice. Support Traore not because he is perfect, but because he is necessary. He is a symbol that Africa can still rise, and rise we must. As Proverbs 29 verse 2 says, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan." Africa has groaned long enough. It is time to rejoice. If you believe in this message, like, share, and subscribe to Black Stories Untold. Let us build a future where our stories are told, not in whispers, but with thunder. And to our leaders, still bowing to foreign masters, the youth are watching, and history is being written. Whether you join or not, we are moving forward.